Hello and welcome to the Underhive. We are back with some more How to Command the Death Guard. In this series, we're going to take a look at every aspect of the Death Guard, so whether you're looking to get more out of your army, or you're thinking of joining Nurgle's finest, then there's something here for you. In this episode, I wanted to come back and take another look at the transports, now I've had some time to play a couple of games with the Termite and the Dreadclaw drop pod. I had played with the Rhino previously, so I don't think my opinion's changing. I didn't think I needed more games with that, but the others I hadn't played with, so I wanted to give them a go before I came to a final opinion, though I do think more reps would allow me to improve on the way I would play them, and ultimately that would factor into whether I feel they're strong or not. So it's not a completely fair opinion. It is a very small sample size, but let's dive in and take a look at how I feel the transports fare in a game with the Death Guard. So first up, the Rhino. I have played with the Rhino in games before. The things I've said about it previously, I don't think have changed. The biggest strengths for it is it's the cheapest transport option. Quite easy to squeeze into a list since the points decreases. If you already had a list built before that, you've probably saved enough points to squeeze one in if you'd like one. Good terrain coverage, something like, WTC layouts, tournament style layouts. Good terrain coverage will generally keep them alive. It won't make it too difficult to hide them. You could even have them on the front line of the deployment zone and not really have many enemies be able to shoot them. You don't really want it to even get bracketed, though, is the issue. So, because if it gets bracketed, it's only moving 6, and realistically, your Plague Marines with an advance would have done better than that, or at least the same. So, it is a tough one to argue for on the front line, but I know a lot of people do that. You have got the smoke available to you in a pinch, so if it does turn out you've got it on the front line, you go in second, and they can draw a lot of beads on it, then you might want to use the smoke just for the -1 to hit. Weaknesses is that going second is a bit of a liability. Your opponent's going to be able to move into a position to probably take a few shots. If we're talking something like Havocs or Eliminators or, something that's got good strength, good AP, good damage, we could actually be saying bye-bye to it straight away. Even with the smoke popped, to be fair. Otherwise, though, if they can't draw a good bead on it, it is likely to get its movement, but that isn't necessarily going to be that much better movement than the squad of Plague Marines themselves could have got. It does allow you to transport 2 squads of 5, which I think is a good shout, because if it can then get into a position between 2 objectives, they can disembark separately, head separate ways the following turn, and claim 2 objectives turn 2. However, it is a soft target relatively. It's toughness 7, which is all right, but your opponent's going to have some kind of anti-tank option, and if that is in the format of shooting, then it's going to line up pretty well into a Rhino, and if that does happen, it's going to be a waste of those 80 points. If it dies, it is going to hurt. So for me, I think it's important to hide it at the beginning. If you do, you're probably quite likely to be able to get where you need to by the end of your movement on turn 2. But for me, that does feel slower than just advancing Marines and having an extra squad there for if the first plan A Marine squad gets killed, you've got another squad in the back there instead of the Rhino to sweep up. Of course, they do cost 25 points more than a Rhino, so if you only had exactly 80 left, the Rhino's probably a good shout. But if you can cut another 25 from somewhere, probably I would go with the Plague Marines more often than not and just march them up. As far as the Termite, so I will say in one of the games I got baited into taking the back corner, and my opponent was Emperor's Children and just kept piling in and consolidating into my Poxwalkers away from the Plague Marines. We did get them off the objective there eventually, but that positioning cost me. I'd have been far better just putting it in the middle. I'd have had my choice of targets to get into. I had the Foul Blight spawn on the middle objective, so even though they were fight lasting me, I could fight last one of them, and they weren't counting as charging, which was giving me at least some game against their fight first shenanigans. An extra squad of Plague Marines in that engagement could have been all the difference, but the fact that they were just slowly moving in from the back corner meant they did nothing the rest of that game. Otherwise, though, I did use it to better effect subsequently, and having it in the middle there did feel powerful. It has the most firepower of any of the transport options with those 5 melters, and I reckon it's worth upgrading to the Volkites for an additional 10 points for 8 shots at strength 5, AP 0, damage 2, with the potential of those mortal wounds. And the other strength there is it can support a full squad of 10 or 2 squads of 5, as well as 2 supporting characters. It can be very, very nice to get those up there early, particularly things like the Foul Blight Spawn, or even just the Malignant Plague Caster to deal out some mortal wounds through spell casting and hitting above a 7 to dish out an additional 1. That can be very, very impactful. Getting rid of most of a squad of infantry in the second turn can be very, very good. And this list was fairly light on shooting. It had some Blight Haulers and a couple of Plague Burst Crawlers in there. Plague Burst Crawlers didn't do very well for me either game, but that can happen. I think if they'd have rolled average, it'd have been fine in that second game. But the first one, despite Typhus holding off a Demon Prince and Lucius, he killed them both, and then Lucius killed him with his retaliation mortal wounds. He got the big 6 and killed Typhus. He only had 2 wounds left, so he was pretty much guaranteed to kill him. But Typhus did really, really well and kept me in the game. If the Plague Burst Crawlers would have been shooting average, I think the fact that I struck in at the back corner would have perhaps been mitigated. But the central objective got overrun once Typhus died, and that was it. End of the game, turn 4, really, because there was just no point carrying on at that point. So the weaknesses there is it's a most expensive transport. You're really going to have to cut something from your list. Even if you were running all of the units that got discounted, you're probably going to have to cut a bit of something to be able to squeeze one in. And it's not any quicker than teleporting in. It does let you do it with Plague Marines, essentially, which otherwise can't, but it's not necessarily any better than a turn 1 advance and a turn 2 move and then be able to make a charge. So 180 points to potentially get screened out if you go in second. Definitely get screened out if your opponent's really mobile. Something like Harlequins, if they want to throw some units at you, can. Something like Tau have got a lot of cheap screening options available to you. Devilfish and Breachers was very, very effective against me. So yeah, I think it suffers with the same weakness the others do in that it gets screened out. But the thing is that realistically, the Plague Marines can get up there themselves. They will benefit from some light cover from time to time. They'll benefit from dense cover a lot on WTC layouts as well. So it's not as simple as just saying, oh, well, they can get shot at, because it might end up being wasted shots given how durable they are against small arms. And if they can end up getting some light and some dense, that's going to be really, really tough to chew through, even just on a troop's choice like Plague Marines. So I don't think the Termite's necessarily worth it. I did have fun using it, and if you've got the model, I would encourage you to play it from time to time just for a bit of fun. But it really loses out to pre-game moves and infiltrator type units, which for me feels a big expense at 180 or 190 points. The drop pod, I've really, really enjoyed using the drop pod. I'll cover it quickly. I've been running a 3 drop pod list for the last couple of games. I managed to get 2 in yesterday with it and had a lot of fun. The first game went really well against Creations of Bile. I got turn 1 and just absolutely controlled the board, and there was very little they could do in return. Putrescent Vitality came in clutch to allow me to not be wounded on anything better than 5s, really, for their Possessed and their Warp Talons. So I weathered the storm there, and then when we hit back, we just absolutely crunched them up. The Possessed actually might have been on 4s. I can't remember now whether they're strength 6, actually, but the Warp Talons were definitely on 5. And even with their rerolls, they didn't get many wounds through, only lost 1 and a bit Death Shroud. And then when we hit back, the Scythe profile was many attacks into them, and absolutely wiped a squad back in return. And realistically, at that point, there was just no fighting them. So it can do very, very well if you go first. But the second game, I was up against Tau. They went first, and lots of pre-game moves. they essentially made it so my drop pods could only hit my deployment zone, which felt really bad. So by no means am I saying 3 drop pods is the right way to go, but it's definitely fun. I think the right way to go with it is 1 drop pod with Typhus and 4 Death Shroud in there. If you get turn 1, you can control the central objective with that, probably for the majority of the game. It's just so hard to chew through all of that. For me, I like to position the drop pod at the extremity of the 9 inches and have the Death Shroud and Typhus behind. Typhus will still be in range to get some spells off if you do want to deal some damage with him. The drop pod base will at least mitigate the angle you can be charged from. You don't really mind them charging the drop pod itself, and then you can countercharge the turn after. If they don't end up making that charge, you can then push out with the drop pod, and then you can move the Death Shroud and Typhus up for probably a more reasonable charge for them to make. You don't necessarily want to charge the Death Shroud off and leave Typhus on his own in that position, because unless you're going to be able to get something else up there to support him, then he's going to be getting shot at. The drop pod being a vehicle of 9 wounds, like right next to him, as far as I'm aware, should work, because it just says if there is a unit with a vehicle in it, which the drop pod is. So he should still be fine next to that, but if you do make a charge with both them and the Death Shroud and leave Typhus on his own, he's not necessarily going to do well under some pitter-patter fire. Just like a weight of dice, like loads of bolter shots, can chew through him eventually. So that's that, but the strength for it, of course, is the turn 1 strike at 115 points. I think it's worth it just for being able to do that. But not only that, it's really good cost to have that plus the melee attacks. It's only 4 attacks and it's only on 4s, but when they get through, they are strength 12, they are AP 4, and they are damage 3. So they deal with elites very, very well. When they push through those attacks, they're generally quite meaningful, though you're not going to push through that many that much of the time. But to just have that on there to be a threat at least gives your opponent a reason to think, actually, I do need to get rid of the drop pod. Because of the durability of the Terminators that it can transport, multiple pods can control the board turn 1 and allow you to get off maybe a Spread the Sickness, even if it's with the Death Shroud. Yeah, they miss out on the shoot in that turn, but it's 4 victory points in the bank. Your home field objective, chances are you've got some Poxwalkers sat on there, so it's probably going to be easy to get those 3 at some point. And because these units don't count towards the reserves limit or reinforcement limit, you can have the majority of your army off the board turn 1. So this list is 3 drop pods. One of them has 4 Death Shroud and Typhus. One of them has 5 Death Shroud. And one of them has 4 Death Shroud, a Malignant Plaguecaster, and a Blight Spawn. Because they're not Terminators, so they only take up 1 slot each. There's 10 slots, but the Death Shroud take up 2. So they're all out turn 1, but they're up in the sky till my turn. And then the rest of the army is 3 squads of Poxwalkers and 3 Plague Burst Crawlers. You can hide all of that on some maps. Not every map, but on some you can hide all of that. And so you're pretty much obscured turn 1. Anything other than something like Long Strike shooting at a Plague Burst Crawler, you're probably okay with. So if you do want to leave those out as a bit of a bullet magnet, you can. If your opponent goes first, they are going to screen out some of the board, but if they're not particularly mobile, it's not that bad of a disadvantage. If it's something very mobile, you're going to suffer. I immediately lost to Tau because of their mobility. But when you go first, you pen them into the board, even if they've got flyers. Yeah, fine, fly closer to the Plague Burst Crawlers, that's fine, they'll quite happily shoot you. And any sort of hidden target, like say some Havocs, fine, I'm willing to let you have 2 up saves. We're going to put 3d6 mortar shots into them and just hope you roll 1s. If you roll any more than 1 of them, I've at least got rid of a las cannon for later. So you can split the shots up like that because you've got enough Plague Burst Crawlers to do it meaningfully, and taking the outer line of sight, even just that on turn 1, so you don't have to expose anything, can be a reasonable shout. So whilst this list very obviously has weaknesses, it is hella fun to play, and it's very, very strong. It's conducive to really quick games. Either you've got a really good position turn 2 or a really bad position turn 2. It's not really in contention, I've found, but it was a very small sample size. So I'm going to play some more with this list and see how it goes. But the weaknesses there, of course, is it loses hard to infiltrators and pre-game moves, and it takes up the fast attack slot, which is arguably the best unit slot in the Death Guard Codex. Flesh mowers are really, really good against killing infantry, and blight haulers are really, really good against anything that needs anti-tank. Not as good into elite infantry, arguably, because like D6 damage isn't great against, say, Terminators. But if you roll in hot on that, then it's just as good as anything else. But against things like big monsters, big enemy vehicles, it's absolutely brilliant to have some blight haulers. So if you are taking 3 drop pods, you're not taking any of those, which means you end up with the Plague Burst Crawlers, which I don't like as much as Blight Haulers, but they are still some shooting, they are still some threat for your opponent to consider, and at the bare minimum, you've got 3d6 mortar shots there with having 3 in the list that you can target something out of line of sight. If it's a Space Marine, it's basically no AP because they've got Armor Contempt and they get +1 to the save. So if they're a Marine in light cover already, they only fail on 1s, but it's 3d6 shots, it's strength 8, it's flat 2 damage. If they roll some 1s, it's killing something. Against anything else, that's probably more like a 3-up save, at which point I think you're really happy with that. If it's a really threatening infantry unit, that would be a fantastic target. But it's also not bad against certain vehicles that, you know, only have a 3-up save, maybe toughness 7. You'll still do all right into those with the Plague Burst. So I'm really enjoying that list. I'm going to try and squeeze another game in today. I tried to squeeze one more in yesterday, but I couldn't. So I want to get one more in it, but I wanted to get the conclusions out there because I don't think I'm going to change my mind. I think the Dreadclaw drop pod is by far the strongest transport, but do I think 3 in a list is a good idea? Competitively, no. For fun and for quick games, yes. 1, I think, is the perfect number. It still leaves you two slots free in your fast attack, so you can take a drone and a squad of blight haulers if you want, or whatever you like, which I think I would even be convinced that 6 blight haulers is a good idea, but that is a lot of points, so you're not going to have much of anything else if you do that. But as I say, I think Typhus and 4 Death Shroud in there, turn 1, coming down, is probably always good enough. Even in these worst case scenarios, he was off the board, none of them could get shot, they're here quicker than they would have been anyway, at the same range they would have been anyway. Chances are next turn your opponent's going to control even more of the board if they're an army that's really good at that. So they may even screen you out from teleporting till turn 3 or turn 4 altogether. So at least having the option to do it turn 1 means you're always going to have somewhere to come in. So for me, drop pod, definitely numero uno. I'd love to hear what you think, so please do feel free to get back to me in the comments. Either way around though, thank you all so much for getting involved, whether it's a like, a comment, a sub. You know it helps me out, you know how YouTube works, but I want to let you know it really does mean a lot to me, so thank you so much for that. But otherwise, thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you next time in the Underhive.